Welcome back to the Better Way podcast as we continue our journey to find innovative ideas, disruptors of the status quo, and those who, like us, just feel like at times there has to be a better way. I'm Zach Coseglia. I am joined, as always, by the one and only Chen. Say hi, Hui.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Today we are joined by a very special guest, Patrick McGowan. Patrick, say hello to everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.
Glad to.
Patrick, why don't we start by just getting to know you a little bit better? Tell us,
Sure.
Who is Patrick?
Well, I can rewind a little bit on my professional background. I'm currently with Fortive Incorporated, which is an industrial portfolio company based in Everett, Washington. And I'm the senior director for global compliance auditing and monitoring. I've been there not quite 2 years. Before that, I was with Raytheon Technologies, but we were only Raytheon Technologies for about a year before I left. I was there for 9 years with United Technologies, and the 2021 merger of United Technologies and Raytheon became Raytheon Technologies. So it was kind of the same place for about 8 years while I was there, United Technologies, and that last year it had transformed significantly. And there, I'll say, I had some really great opportunities there. I joined that company in a role I think at the time was called fraud manager. We changed that to forensic accounting manager, and within about 2 years, I had the opportunity to stand up a team. I kind of made up the idea on the back of a placemat, and really wanted to do a lot more of this work, but felt like we needed more capabilities, more bandwidth. Before that, I was with Pfizer in the internal audit department and a corporate audit compliance group for about 5 years, mostly doing investigation type work around compliance risks, obviously heavy around the bribery and corruption, FCPA, but some other, very interesting things as well. And before that, I was in the client serving space with Ernst & Young in their forensic practice group out of Chicago. And kind of before that, that's when I was in graduate school, kind of my post-Marine Corps career transformation, where I did an MBA and law school at Indiana University. So that's kind of the high-level, quick overview of how I wound up here.
So let me just highlight a few things that actually jumped out at me there. Not that I didn't know this before, because Patrick and I, full disclosure, have been friends. Patrick is a former Marine. Thank you for your service, sir. And a JD and an MBA. And an auditor and a compliance professional.
Literally all the things.
Yeah, double threat, sing and dance.
Quadruple. Patrick and I, we didn't meet actually while at Pfizer, although we share that on our resume. We met because Hui used to organize these salons of like-minded folks who shared an interest in a particular topic. And we met years ago when Hui organized one of these at AB InBev with Matt Galvin, who's now at the DOJ, and with the two of us, and with just a number of other folks who were living in the compliance space and interested in analytics. We're on this journey for better ways, and analytics and data has very much been a part of my search and journey for better ways. And it's been part of yours too. Tell us about that, Patrick.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there because, as I, started learning in the profession and in this field, it did strike me, at some point that the two real lesser explored frontiers were this area of analytics, call it what you like, data science, data analytics, compliance analytics. And I'd say the kind of behavioral science, right? And there's a really important coupling between those two areas, but it, could see that other disciplines had been doing some, the solutions. Now, if we just talk about the kind of analytics side of things, there's other disciplines and other industries that were doing so much more than I felt like we were, right? So it seemed like we were leaving a lot of money on the table. I think people have maybe a bit of a stigma about auditors and accountants and think that it's their strength in math and their love for mathematics or something that gets them into that. It really isn't. My goodness, have marketing professionals developed some bat speed in the analytical space and use that in incredibly impressive ways. that I feel like kind of run laps around some of the things that I've seen in the compliance domain in some.
The most important word I feel like you just said was mathematics. Because I feel like, and I'd love to know, if this misconception has popped up in your life, which is this idea that analytics or even data science it's reduced to dashboarding. This concept that, like,
nicely said.
this thing that we're doing is all about creating a Tableau dashboard, or it's about a Power BI, and it's not. It's all of the amazing, wonderful, exciting, sometimes complex things that are happening behind the scenes that often involve math. So how do you define this discipline?
Great question. Great frame for it. And I think that's true. How do you define it is a tough one. I don't know if I can do it, but I'll say that the vast domain of data solutions, data analytics, I've started to kind of refer to as compliance analytics in our domain.
Yep.
Is just I think it's just the use of quantitative methods to solve problems. Some of the most interesting stuff that I've seen and interesting solutions are pretty simplified stuff. In my MBA program, now one faculty member, Wayne Winston, well known around the world for his quantitative methods and things that he's done, and wrote a book in 2009 called Mathletics. And there was kind of a trend of Moneyball and use of kind of new awareness about the use of analytics in sports, which I personally love and think is a lot of fun. Wayne, in a couple of pages in one chapter, did a great simplified analysis of just trying to answer the question: was this NBA referee fixing games in some way? Wayne Winston did kind of a 2-variable analysis by creating like an expected value of the number of fouls for all NBA games. And he explains the computations. He used sound statistical techniques to create an expected value, and also compared that to which official was officiating a game and whether the Vegas line moved from kind of the opening line, implying that there was a lot of betting on those particular games. It's in 2 or 3 pages, such a succinct, clean analysis that is very stark in its results. Like the solution domain today, in terms of statistical techniques and data solutions, is so much bigger than what is being applied today. There's a lot of dashboarding. So I also don't want to say you shouldn't do that, because I think people are getting a lot of functionality out of that, but it does kind of leave a lot of money on the table, is the kind of way I see it, is that, there's limitations to that. There's a lot of things that are interesting and worth exploring, but kind of don't maybe get the attention that they should, because we're all, there's so much reliance on these new data visualization tools and stuff like that.
So Patrick, there's a couple of things that you talked about that rings back to a lot of the conversations that we've had back in 2010, 2011. I was working with you in Pfizer, and we had a market that didn't have any issues in the past, or at least, for the past few years before I joined, had been quiet investigation.
Yeah.
And suddenly several investigation matters popped up in that same market. Yeah. So I, as I was making trips to that market, I said, I wonder what's going on here. What is up with this sudden spike of cases? And someone turned to me and said, well, Patrick predicted that 2 years ago. And so that was the first time I had ever heard of somebody doing predictive analytics. And again, we're talking about, back a decade and a half ago. Is there a way you can help people like me understand how did you do that? What kind of data did you look at to make that kind of predictive work possible?
It was an interesting little, evolution. A couple of things. One is, just kind of the reflex that, trying to use data to solve problems, focusing on some type of clean quantification and comparison that would be meaningful. Okay, so I'll say that in the client serving space, there was I think a healthy discussion that we were having about our audit clients and our riskiest audit clients, and like, how do we know how effective their compliance program is, and do they have a functioning whistleblower mechanism, all this stuff. When the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, they do their annual survey, many people may be familiar with it. If not, they kind of do an annual global fraud survey that every year, one of the prominent, answers is that, the leading way that frauds are surfaced is through whistleblower tips. So And it's just been that way the entire time I've been in the profession, which always meant two things to me. It meant, one, we want that whistleblower mechanism to function really well. There's more than just having it, right? There's other, elements of policy and non-retaliation and having it, in different languages, accessibility, all that kind of stuff that matter. But the other thing that was important in my mind was that kind of everything else that we're doing is a little bit in the medieval stages, right? That if that's the best way that we're finding stuff is someone ambles through the door and blurts it out. It's like, really? So all the auditing, all the other things that we're doing, aren't having, a better effect than that? Okay. So just started thinking about, well, how can we get ahead of it a little bit? Because it just felt like we were always playing defense, that things get reported and we're the last to, know that, whatever was going on, and maybe it's been a long running issue and all this stuff. And it seemed painful, expensive, and disruptive. Well, how would we know where to target better? And then maybe we could decide to do something there. Like if we know where there's, radio silence and stuff like this. I started with trying to get a clean comparison of where compliance issues surface and how they're reported and stuff like that. And I tried many different, modeling techniques that went absolutely nowhere. So a lot of blind alleys before it, ultimately figured a fairly simple, straightforward 2-variable analysis gave me a lot of insight. So just taking a per capita measurement, like it wasn't enough to just say how many issues have been reported, but having a comparability of that to measure it, by the population, and having enough people in a given jurisdiction, was necessary. So I think I had to have like a minimum of 100, people or 100 employees or something in a given country. And then do that measurement over 6 years. And it's just a simple, a simple quantification. And then comparing that at first to just the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index and an ordinal ranking. So not the absolute scores that they get from all the different indices that they mash together to get that, but how they rank the corrupt jurisdictions from 1 to 180 or whatever that was. When I did that, just plot those along the X and Y axis and scatter plot that, it was a shotgun blast. Just looking at that shotgun blast, the couple of things that really stood out to me was, well, there are some places where we have, nothing going on in 6 years, and quantitatively, that's just, okay, you're kind of Lance Armstrong with your compliance program. You're winning every time in a really difficult business environment. And to me, that did seem a little Lance Armstrong-like, that not possible, right? Something should be happening here and it's not. So now how do we kind of shake the bushes a little bit and see what is not surfacing? What are our other indicators just insensitive to? In that regard, struck me as there's got to be something there that's undiscovered, right? So that was one insight of that. And from there were many different permutations of that particular model, taking, not just that corrupt perceptions index, CPI, but there's so many other things that could be layered in there. So I started taking that same model and using it that way, and started layering in other things that I think most people in the compliance domain recognize, that it's marketing expense, and that tends to be the more susceptible, vulnerable dollars in the bribery and corruption space. So looking at quantifications of marketing expense to OpEx or revenue or something like that, and kind of taking all of those into that model, starting with a fairly simplified 2-variable model, but then, kind of adding in other elements or substituting other elements, was getting some new and interesting insight. So that's kind of how that started. Later on, I named that analysis the Cassandra analysis, like Cassandra in mythology had the gift of prophecy, but no one would believe her.
So I want to break it down for folks. The original version of the Cassandra model.
Yeah.
So you had, along one axis, you had a ratio of reports to the hotline and the size of the jurisdiction or the subsidiary, with a minimum number of employees required for it to be in scope. So that was one axis. Is that right?
Yes. With the caveat that I did it that way, and with all issues, whether it came through the hotline or not. So kind of anything that surfaced an issue, whether it was kind of a hotline report or internal audit found it or something like this.
And then on the other axis, at least initially, you use the corruption perceptions index.
Yeah, just the ordinal ranking. Yeah.
And you described it as a shotgun or a shotgun blast.
It just covered the page, and I was like, okay, I don't know if that helps me at all. If you're looking for correlation, you're looking for this concentration along, either a linear, axis or some, some type of curve, defined curve, and you can kind of see the mathematical relationship between a couple of variables that way.
Once you started analyzing the data, what were the insights that you derived from it? What was the human insight that you were then able to communicate to a leader to say, I think there's something here?
Yeah. So it was a couple of things. It started, as I say, kind of a shock and blast. You just imagine just, the X and Y axis, just a blast of, data points kind of appear kind of random. But when I took like the mean value, the average value on both the X and Y axis and kind of put that onto that chart and say, okay, we can kind of look at this as maybe 4 quadrants. And we've got one quadrant here where it's a less corrupt business environment and there's not a lot of issues being reported. Maybe that's what we expect. And that's maybe that seems to be about what we want. But we've also got a less corrupt environment and higher than average surfacing of these issues. Okay, what explains that? Maybe there may be, a reason why we've got persistent issues that haven't been fully remediated or whatever. I was looking from west to east, on the chart, and it would be, kind of the more corrupt business environment where we have higher than reporting or higher surfacing of issues. That's probably what we expect too. Then I think it maybe prompts the natural questions. Are we doing enough there to get in front of those things? Are they the kind of things that we would expect in that space? But, at least we could be confident that we're hearing things. It's that last quadrant where it's a more corrupt business environment and, low reporting over time, right? Like, it kind of defies the odds. So here's the most interesting quadrant in my mind. It's a little bit like if I flip a coin, 10 times and I tell you that I got 7 heads and 3 tails, no one should be too surprised. But if I flipped a coin 1,000 times and I told you that I got 700 heads, there's no way, right? There's kind of a regression to the mean in quantitatively, right? That's just impossible. It just seemed unlikely that, we have the same kind of, let's say, comparable business operations in places that have real challenges in their business environment and that we're that clean, that we're just doing it better. It strikes me as, that's defying the odds in a way that's a little bit, I don't know, surprising. And so much more likely it seemed that we ought to be looking there. And I think when for experienced business leaders and compliance or not, I think everyone recognizes, these things just don't get better with age, that if they're, left to metastasize, for long periods of time, it just gets worse and worse. So, as a business leader, wouldn't you rather focus on driving the business than dealing with these compliance issue headaches that, as they get worse? And so I think there was at least something about that it didn't require, I think, complicated mathematics or computation for that notion to be, I think, accessible, appealing, and, to see the utility of it.
What I love about this example, and this kind of also goes back to this point about, analytics, compliance analytics being more than just a dashboard, is that it's not always the case that visual has all the answers. Sometimes that visual is there so that we know which questions to be asking.
Yeah, I totally agree, Zach. This entire domain is, as much about the interpretation of the results of whatever computation, whatever model you're doing as it is, the model itself or the results itself. I think that's where the real meaning is. And maybe the starting point to how do we use that information to make our organization better so it shouldn't just be a science fair project that, we show to our friends who like data science. It should be something that, that says something meaningful to, functional leadership or, general management, something.
So I also love this for a number of other reasons. So one, it's about storytelling. I mean, you have data, you plot it out in something that didn't look like there's any sense at all, but then you really try to dig in and figure out the story that this data is telling you. The other part is that I love this very scientific thinking about, I'm going to try these different things. And frankly, I love the fact that you even gave it a name. So, right. So I have to say, Patrick, I don't know if I told you, but when people started telling me about the data analytics work that you were doing, and they would add this description that, Patrick is like something like a compliance ninja. He just does this in his spare time. So there is another project that you did that I know of that I actually have urged you to write it up as an academic paper. Sure. And my understanding was that actually helped you show your management talk about leaving money on the table. So tell us about that other project that you did.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about, and it's amazing to me sometimes the mileage that I got out of that particular analysis. And I remember in that case, I was new at the company, and they didn't, to be perfectly honest, they didn't know what I should be doing. So I started out just with a vague assignment of some expense review. So what I was learning about this expense data in this case was a couple of things. One was that in this transactional data, people could use their company credit card, or they could use, cash or a personal credit card for any expenses, right? So so I was either getting kind of system generated transactions or manually entered expense transactions. Okay, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lines of data in this case. And another interesting element was that they had a receipt limit like many companies do, and it was $25. So I just was curious, okay, which expenses, were most common under that. But then when I kind of sliced it by, the manually entered ones, there was definitely the most were these self-dinner meals. Okay. So did a histogram, which, very simply, all this is kind of a frequency chart. So I was doing like a bar chart that would show the number of meals between 0 and $4.99. And the next bar in the chart is from $5 to $9.99, and so on and so forth. So that I had, everything, and importantly, the count of the number of self-dinner meals that were $20 to $24.99. Sounds pretty boring so far, but when I separated the system-generated transactions, right, something that's coming from someone's company credit card, and did that bar chart, along these $5 bins, I got a nice smooth curve, kind of like the sledding hill that I used as a kid. Data nerds are like me and Zach are, it's a log normal distribution, kind of this long sloping to the right. So you kind of see that meal expenses have kind of a predictable distribution of the frequency in these different amounts. And then when I did that with the manually entered transactions by comparison, it looked very different. It was kind of a steep slope in those lower dollar amounts in those bins, but really peaked at $20 to $24.99. Maybe some people think, well, duh, isn't that obvious? But again, the quantification and comparison is important here because, it's a little bit like flipping the coin, and it doesn't work out 50-50. We're seeing a stark difference in the frequency that people have a self-dinner meal that costs between $20 and $24.99, but only if they manually enter the amount. And if it's a system generator, that's not true. So to me, this was a really surprising result. There's a very different behavior that's implied by this. And in my mind, food costs the same, whether you manually enter the amount or you use your credit card or anything else, right? So this is kind of, okay, that it just doesn't seem right. Started looking at other, the other expense types that also had kind of a lot just below the receipt limit. And most of those didn't look the same. Some did and some didn't. For example, just to contrast, like office supplies or something like that was one of the ones that also had a lot of manually entered transactions just below that receipt threshold. But there was no similar, stark difference between the frequency that had a cutoff at the receipt limit. My explanation looking at the evidence was, well, if I have to buy office supplies, I kind of need whatever I need. If I need toner cartridges, I got to buy them. But if I'm buying food, I can always go get a $5 footlong and say it was $24.99 or something, right? There's low-cost substitutes kind of all over the place. Some things there's not low-cost substitutes. I did so many permutations of this that, it continued to reinforce the proposition that there's probably a fair amount of dishonesty in the incremental difference where people are saying they're manually entering a transaction for just under the receipt limit versus a system-generated one. Ultimately, I did this analysis with, I think something like 1.3 million meal expenses, and if I took everything that was not denominated in US dollars, it was something like 63 foreign currencies. It had the exact same, model characteristics. It had that threshold avoidance behavior, if you will, right? But people that are using a manually entered expense just below the receipt threshold, but in any one of 63 foreign currencies, and it looked exactly the same, right? You'd see the kind of smooth curve with system-generated transactions, and you'd see that, disrupted curve, if you will, for manually entered transactions. And that just shouldn't be true in, just a mash of of dozens of different foreign currencies, $25 shouldn't mean anything, but it did. Once we had that insight, it's like, well, it's not all of the employees doing it. And when I broke it out by business unit, I kind of charted this out. Every chart looked the same in every business unit, right? You could see like that had to be something is going on there. And as you exclude other possibilities, like people are just losing receipts, it became pretty convincing that this implied there's a lot of people who are maybe cheating a little bit. Right, so this wasn't necessarily a huge amount of money necessarily for any one person, but it was something. It showed a cheating behavior that was pretty clear.
What I think is really interesting about this, though, is that even as over the years, as we've pushed back on it, there's this tendency to think about rules, to think about compliance as sort of a series of rules, and to then build even our analytics programs around a series of rules. And I think one of the takeaways for me from this example is that there are probably a lot of programs out there who think about this issue as how many people are actually exceeding the threshold and not submitting a receipt. Or in other scenarios, how many people are exceeding the amount that they're allowed to spend full stop. Or how many people are paying a certain number of consultants more than they're allowed to pay them.
Yeah.
And what you've identified here, and this is the phrase that I love, threshold avoidance. It's not threshold violation, threshold avoidance. And so what you're ultimately doing here is not just modeling data. You're actually telling a story about human behavior. Far more interesting.
But that's really the point, is that there's this coupling with human behavior. There's something connected here, and that the quantitative model tells us something, and vice versa.
So what I got out of that was that you use data to find a story about how humans are behaving in the company. Then you use that behavior to try to then identify other areas where this type of behavior could create even more risk than just a few dollars from dinner. The data leading to behavior, and behavior identify greater risk, and then sort of evolving cycle of
absolutely
allowing you to apply this in different ways to find different risky behaviors. I find that fascinating.
I do too, but it's interesting because I don't know that the better way here is analytics. I mean, maybe that's the bigger, better way. But the other better ways that I'm hearing from this are, you said, I was curious.
Yeah.
You were curious and you did something about it. Like that's a better way. Like let's actually satiate our curiosity and explore data in ways that help us answer important questions.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Zach. I think what you said, Wei, also is really important and interesting, because I certainly don't compare some of the things that I've done to this, but I remember reading it's a great book called Micromotives and Macro Behavior by Thomas Schelling, and maybe not a lot of people know him. He was a Nobel economist, so he certainly did some important work. And if you read that book, there's lots of really interesting stuff in there. But the intro to the book is enough, I think, to kind of highlight this point that you were making, Wei. And just he describes, as I recall, he was just standing in an auditorium and people were filing in to sit in and listen to his lecture. And he started just making little observations about the way that individual people, chose their seat in the auditorium, whether they wanted to be next to someone or didn't want to be next to someone, or wanted to be in an aisle, or wanted to be close, or wanted to be further away. And he kind of was looking at this, and it was occurring to him that there's just kind of the net effect of all these little these internal rules that everybody is going by, but then there's an aggregated effect. And that's, kind of the micromotives and macro behavior, the way that Thomas Schelling then ultimately made some incredible observations about population movement and other things. But it was kind of the origin of agent-based modeling and some powerful analytical techniques and models. Being curious is an incredibly valuable element in this. If I think for someone that doesn't really, isn't really interested in it's not going to work. You're not going to really. I think you're going to have a hard time with all the challenges that you have in this business and in this field. You really have to have something of a relentless curiosity gear that helps take you to where you're going to find some value add in the space.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about this because I love the phrase relentless curiosity. I think that's definitely a quality that you want in the people who do this. I also believe that part of the reason why we find ourselves still at sort of the earlier stages in the application of analytics in the compliance space is because we don't have the right people. Relentless curiosity is part of that equation, but there are other skills that you need as well. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about the skills that you think we need to be able to do this work well and right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting point because it does feel like there's a lot of lawyers and auditors in this space, and some of, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I really was starting to feel that it was the data analytics and the behavioral science, that those were the two lesser explored frontiers in our field. I think people are doing amazing stuff with this. And there's probably people in our field doing some remarkable things. But
well, gosh, if only someone would create a, I don't know, lab, like in a law firm.
Yeah.
Behavioral science.
How about that? And some people have.
How about that?
Yeah.
So didn't pay to say this, folks.
There are some really great things that no doubt that people are doing here. But, if you look at the broader practice, it's certainly not everywhere. And it's certainly not kind of maybe predominant in the space. And there's still, I think, the solution domain in both, the behavioral science and the data science space is so much bigger than what we've applied to our problem domain as compliance professionals in the aggregate. So what do we do about it? It's a great question. Wei and I have talked about this quite a bit in the past, and it still, strikes me that after all this time in this field and in, going to many of the conferences and there's many that are good, but there's many that, sometimes I'm just feeling like we're just kind of mulching over the same things that I've heard. There's a little bit of calcification there. And just by contrast, about 10 years ago or so, I started going to a different conference. I got into like a data analytics working group in my company that led me to a group of statisticians working in one business unit. But they kind of lured me into attending the Joint Statistical Meeting, which is an annual meeting of, I think it is primarily hosted by the American Statistical Association, but many other counterpart organizations from other countries like the UK and India and every other country that has a professional association like that. There's like 6,000 attendees that attend this 6-day conference, all statisticians, mathematicians, data scientists. And there was nothing in the compliance domain in this out of 4,700 sessions, nothing in the financial or accounting fraud space or anything that you could say compliance. And even like kind of the business and economics section, wasn't predominant in this. But the thing that was amazing to me is like, I really felt like we were a little bit backwards in our profession, that we're getting all of our compliance professionals together and we're having panels of mostly lawyers and a couple of maybe auditors or accountants. I feel like there are so many, PhD candidates and other professionals that are excited about data solutions and novel applications of them and are ready and willing to go deep into those, exploring those data techniques. It just, in a way, I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't found our way to merge those.
I actually had contemplated at one point about proposing very concrete problems that we bring to the Joint Statistical Meeting and say, we come from this other planet called compliance. We have these type of problems. We have these types of data. How can you help us?
All right, Patrick, this has been such a good, amazing conversation.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
We've identified so many better ways, the use of data analytics, the importance of curiosity, but now we want to have just a little bit of fun. I think we prepared you for this. We're a very human-centered organization here at R&G Insights Lab, so we want to put the human at the center of the conclusion of each episode of our podcast.
Sure.
So we've created our own Proust questionnaire. For me, it was very much inspired by James Lipton and Inside the Actor Studio, inspired by Vanity Fair and a whole bunch of others. We have some questions to ask you to get to know you a little bit better. All right, Patrick. So question number 1, you get to choose which one you want to answer. So either A, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained any one quality or ability, what would it be? Or would you like to answer B, is there a quality about yourself that you're currently working to improve? And if so, what is it?
I guess I'd say A, and can I say like the Vulcan mind trick or Jedi mind trick? Is that a capability?
Totally.
That's what I would absolutely like to make use of. Yeah, absolutely.
We are so on the same page because everyone else says that I'm going to give something that could actually happen.
Yeah.
Actually, although I think me manipulating time and you getting the Vulcan mind trick is about as likely as singing opera.
Yeah. But Mr. Spock would have made a great compliance professional in some ways. He'd get his way in the organization.
Okay, so question number 2 is, who is your favorite mentor, or who do you wish you could be mentored by?
So someone who is deceased now, but Luis Alvarez, and maybe people don't know Luis Alvarez, but he was a physicist who was awarded the Nobel Prize in physics. And I just remember the first time I encountered him, I was reading the book, The Cuckoo's Egg by Clifford Stoll. And I've read that book a couple times, once like 30 years ago, once about 10 years ago. And it's about Clifford Stoll starts by, he's kind of like, falling in the cracks in the academic space a little bit, as he describes it at UC Berkeley. He gets stuck trying to solve a 75-cent accounting error. It ultimately leads to kind of an epic journey and discovering that a hacker was using their computers to break in the Department of Defense at the time, and he helps unravel it. But at one point, he's kind of frustrated with this problem. No one else cares about it and all this. And he's sitting at a table with Luis Alvarez, this paragon of science, as someone who, and he's complaining, he's kind of venting, not enough money, no one cares, and I'm off track on my career. And he kind of sets him straight in a paragraph that Clifford Stoll, accounts. And he says, forget about all that stuff, other stuff. You're never going to have enough money. No one's ever going to care. You've got to run faster than this other guy. It was just the kind of tough love of someone who, has profound achievements in their rearview mirror that gives them, a point of reference, the perspective on, you're wrong about that. I think that's what you want out of a mentor in many, it's not your champion. It's not your wartime consigliere. It's someone who is going to help you in critical decisions at times like that and steer you right, where you are kind of clouded by your own biases and lack of perspective, and someone else who has that and takes an interest in you and doesn't.
Amazing. What is the best job you've ever had?
Yeah, it's got to be when I was in the Marines. I mean, I don't know. There's probably nothing else that has had quite that sense of camaraderie, shared purpose. And, and my love for our country. It was certainly not the easiest job I ever had, most glorious, but it was awesome. What a great organization and great people, and, people that are in your life for, the rest of your life, and people that are, really understand, taking things to that next level, pushing your limits, shared sense of mission objective. So yeah, absolutely the best job I've had.
What is your favorite thing to do?
In the autumn, in deer season, out in the woods, just kind of having this, whether or not, you actually see any deer on that particular day, but just having a direct connection with nature and just the smell and sounds of and the tranquility of being in the woods like that. And, I've had really great experiences with, one of my old Marine buddies, and, kind of going out in the morning on a brisk November morning and coming back to, his cabin, having some country cooking, the camaraderie and fellowship of all that, I don't know, pretty awesome.
Well, this is a related question, which is, what's your favorite place?
Sometimes I also like, when you have that opportunity to have a real, a great evening out and appreciate the arts and maybe go a nice upscale dinner, but then go see the symphony or something like that, or the theater. Really have enjoyed over the years, like something like Tanglewood, the Boston Symphony, and the Berkshires, that outdoor concert. I mean, that is just, incredibly fun. So seeing people that have, again, a dedication to excellence and just, in my mind, in a way that the live performances of those kind of master works and stuff like that, it's something to behold.
What makes you proud?
Ooh, well, professionally speaking, I would have to say, in recently, of some of the people I've worked with in this business, and especially some of the ones that I had recruited into, Pied Pipered onto my little, team at my last company, that have gone on to do other things that are just remarkable, and seeing them develop and take on new levels of leadership and capability and new solutions. I got to say, that is just awesome to see stuff like that take place.
That's really great. And we're going to go from the depth of that response to the shallowest response on this quiz.
Also fun.
What email sign off do you use?
Well, if it's a someone, fellow military personnel or Marine, I use Semper Fi a lot. But most of the time I use like best or sometimes cheers. Those are kind of the most common for me.
And finally, what word would you use to describe your day so far?
Earnestly, I'd have to say inspiring, because I love talking about these things, especially with Zach and Wei, just people that are similarly interested in this and get kind of juiced about exploring new solutions. That's the funnest part of, this line of work. It's like any, my job is like any job I've ever had. You may not love every task related job, but you may love your career and your role. When you get to do the most exciting parts of it and think about, what are the possibilities here, and what could we be doing? To me, that's an exciting element of this.
And you've been so generous with your time, Patrick. Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in to the Better Way podcast and exploring all of these better ways with us. For more information about this or anything else that's happening with R&G Insights Lab, please visit our website at www.ropesgray.com/RG Insights Lab. You can also subscribe to this series wherever you regularly listen to podcasts, including on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And if you have thoughts about what we talked about today, the work the lab does, or just have ideas for better ways we should explore, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening.